We've all had moments where someone says something and days later it still echoes in our minds. It wasn't obvious and it wasn't loud, but it left a stain, and then your energy feels drained, or you may have noticed an uncomfortableness in the pit of your stomach, and you probably downplayed it by saying to yourself, maybe I'm being too sensitive, or maybe they didn't mean it like that. But I'm here to tell you that wasn't your imagination. That was your nervous system sounding the alarm. Hi, I'm Christy, board certified nurse practitioner, health coach, and trauma survivor. This is Trauma Free, where I help you change your mind and change your life, just like I did. And today, we're not just talking about toxic people, because let's be real, the ones who do the most damage rarely come with warning labels. They don't always cheat, lie, or yell. Instead, they quietly offer you dysfunction through smiles, silence, and subtle sabotage. So in this video, I'm uncovering 5 types of people you need to cut off right now because they will quietly sabotage your healing, block your manifestations, and keep your brain stuck in survival mode by wearing a fake mask of love, loyalty, and support. So if you want to live in peace, in your purpose, and maintain your personal power, it's not just about what you do. It's about who you allow around you. Because the people you spend the most time with are either regulating your nervous system or keeping you stuck in the same patterns you're trying to escape from. Because when someone repeatedly triggers your fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response, your brain doesn't just notate it as a bad vibe. It starts to reshape itself around that threat because of neuroplasticity. And it works both ways for damage or healing, depending on what you're exposed to. So let's uncover these 5 types of toxic people so you can finally stop wondering why you're stuck and start protecting your peace. First, there's the underminer. And on the surface, they clap for you, but their applause are fake. You feel it in your gut, even if your mind tries to override it. The underminer disguises sabotage as support. Their compliments come wrapped in criticism, with praises laced with poison. They say things like, wow, you finally finished that degree. I guess anything's possible. Or you look great. Have you lost weight? Or are you just wearing more makeup today? Social rejection, even when it's subtle and passive aggressive, it activates the same neural pathways as physical pain by triggering the anterior cingulate cortex and the insula, which are the very regions that light up when you burn your hand or stub your toe. Because that emotional sting, it's not just in your head, it's in your brain. And over time, these interactions create cognitive dissonance, and you start to think, why do I feel so small around someone who is supposed to support me? And that emotional confusion forces your into a state of identity conflict. You start to second guess your own reality, which weakens your self-trust and strengthens their control because people who undermine you often operate from a place of insecurity, masked as superiority, which is a classic hallmark of covert narcissism. They inflate themselves by deflating others, but they do it quietly so they seem nice. And here's where it becomes dangerous because your nervous system learns patterns. If you regularly interact with someone who smiles while listening to you, your brain starts associating safety with subtle harm, which is basically trauma bonding disguised as a relationship. You'll know when it's time to walk away if you feel confused after conversations. You replay what they said in your mind days later, and you can't decide if you're overreacting or undervaluing yourself. But let me tell you, you're not overreacting because the underminer doesn't throw stones. They hand you flowers with thorns. Beautiful on the surface, but be around them long enough and you'll eventually bleed. You don't need to decode their support. You should feel it because love doesn't confuse. Real relationships don't make you shrink. And if you're constantly having to just fit into someone else's comfort zone, this won't feel comfortable for you. So cutting off an underminer isn't cruel. It's no longer undermining yourself and your well-being because you can't fully grow in soil that secretly poisons your roots. Second, there's the taker or the energetic vampire. Takers don't always show up with demands or drama. Sometimes they arrive quietly with one small request, then another, then a crisis, and then the chaos begins. And before you know it, your entire relationship becomes centered around their emotional roller coaster of a life. So you end up being the constant therapist, fixer, and the emotional sponge who listens endlessly but never feels heard. This kind of dynamic, it often masquerades as connection because it feels like you're playing an important role in their life, but you're really only playing a role for their own benefit as they slowly deplete your energy while they give nothing back in return. And here's what most people don't realize. When you're constantly on the receiving end of someone who emotionally leeches off you, especially without reciprocity, it can cause dysregulation to your nervous system because overextending yourself emotionally without co-regulation leads to vagal dysregulation, which is a breakdown in your parasympathetic nervous system's ability to return your body to a calm and balanced state. The vagus nerve, which governs your rest and digest response, becomes overworked. And when it's constantly taken over by someone else's emotional emergencies, you may begin to feel on the edge for no obvious reason, emotionally fatigued, physically exhausted or sick, anxious in the presence of the person you're helping, or even numb or detached from your own emotions because biologically, you're overworking your system from taking on too much that doesn't even belong to you. And over time, these one-sided relationships break down your identity because you stop asking, what do I want? And start asking, how can I help? Your needs shrink, your boundaries blur. And the worst part, you may start to believe that this is what a relationship looks like, but it's not. Because genuine connections involve mutual regulation, which is a balance of emotional give and take that allows both people to feel seen, supported, and safe. So when someone constantly expects you to hold space for them but offers nothing in return, they're sucking the life out of you. And when you finally set a boundary and say, I'm not available for this right now, you may probably be met with guilt tripping, passive aggressiveness, withdrawal, and accusations of being selfish or cold because the connection was never built on mutual care. It was built on your capacity to carry them. So if someone can sit silently through your pain after you've showed up for theirs, that's not a bond. That's a trauma bond. And sadly, so many people unknowingly stay in this cycle because of fawning, which is a survival response rooted in people pleasing that occurs when your nervous system believes that earning love means minimizing yourself and meeting others' needs before your own. But you have to reclaim your power by deciding that your energy is sacred and not a public resource. This isn't about cutting people off in anger. It's about recognizing when connections have turned into consumption and making the courageous decision to stop allowing your life force energy into people who never give back. So if you're feeling depleted, used, or emotionally drained after interactions, it's not just in your head, it's in your nervous system, and it's trying to warn you. So listen. Third, the trust breaker. Trust is not optional, it's a requirement in relationships. And when someone violates that trust, especially with your most vulnerable truths, it doesn't just hurt your feelings, it alters your brain. Because trust isn't just about secrets, it's about safety. When you share your story, your pain, and your unfiltered emotions with someone, your brain makes a critical calculation. I'm safe here. But when that trust is broken, your brain interprets it as a threat to its survival. Because the amygdala, your brain's alarm system, doesn't differentiate between emotional betrayal and physical danger. Because when someone leaks your private pain, mocks your trauma under the disguise of humor, or uses your vulnerabilities against you, it triggers the same neurocircuitry as a physical threat. Cortisol floods your system, your heart rate increases, and your body enters a state of hypervigilance or hyperawareness because repeated betrayal changes your neuroception, your nervous system's ability to detect safety or danger without conscious thought. You start scanning conversations for red flags. You overanalyze tone and you replay interactions, not because you're insecure, but because your brain is trying to prevent another ambush. And it goes deeper because it's been shown that betrayal affects memory encoding and threat detection, meaning the brain starts categorizing safe environments as unsafe. So you begin to associate connection with danger and relationships with risk. This is how betrayal hardwires self-protection into your nervous system until emotional intimacy itself becomes a trigger. Because when someone jokes about your trauma, downplays your struggle, or publicly shares what was said in private, it doesn't just feel like an insult. It fractures your sense of self. Because sharing your story is how you heal. And when that story is mishandled, it sends a message to your brain that your truth isn't safe here. And over time, this leads to emotional inhibition, where you begin to withhold, shrink, or silence yourself, not just around that person, but in other relationships too. So you have to reclaim your safety by setting boundaries, not because you're upset, but because your nervous system is asking you for relief. You don't need a dramatic confrontation or a long explanation. You don't need them to understand, apologize, or agree. What you need is to protect the most sacred thing that you have, which is your peace. Trust should be demonstrated consistently, not conveniently. And when someone shows you through their words, their jokes, or their choices that they don't value your truth, believe them. Fourth, the drama magnet. And not all chaos is accidental. Some people aren't just surrounded by drama, they're fueled by it because they thrive on the adrenaline, the rush of conflict, the urgency of crisis, and the emotional high of being the center of the storm. Every day is a new emergency. Every conversation is a performance, with them at the center as the misunderstood victim. You may start to feel like you're always on call to save the day for them, and afterwards, you're always left feeling drained. You should know that your brain is not a detached observer. It's a deeply social organ wired for emotional attunement. Thanks to mirror neurons that are specialized brain cells that mimic the emotional states of others. So your nervous system actually begins to absorb the moods, the tone, and tensions of those around you. This is called emotional contagion, and it's actually measurable. Because when you're around someone who's chronically in distress or conflict, your limbic system, the brain's emotional command center, gets repeatedly activated, and your amygdala interprets this stress as danger. Your hypothalamus signals your adrenal glands, and your body floods with cortisol and adrenaline, the same stress hormones released in life and death situations. And over time, this leads to heightened anxiety, mood instability, emotional exhaustion, insomnia or fatigue, difficulty focusing or making decisions or decision fatigue, and a sense of walking on eggshells, even when they're not around, which is a neurobiological response to the emotional toll that they cause on you. And here's the pattern that's hard to unsee. With drama magnets, the story always changes, but the role they play, it doesn't. They are always misunderstood, always wronged, and always the victim, no matter how many times the cast of characters rotate. But if the common denominator in every situation is them, that's a behavioral pattern. And if you try to introduce logic or accountability, you're likely met with defensiveness, deflection, or a new crisis to shift your attention. Because for drama magnets, stability feels unfamiliar. They may have grown up in chaotic environments where they thrive in the confusion and without realizing it. You may get pulled into the role of the rescuer, where you end up overcompensating, explaining, and apologizing for things that aren't your fault. And your tendency to be compassionate gets twisted by their need for codependency. But you are not responsible for managing someone else's nervous system, especially at the expense of your own. And the fifth is the competitor. Not all threats to your peace are loud. Some come wrapped in smiles, compliments, and even applause. But beneath the surface, you can feel it. That's the subtle shift in energy. The praise that somehow centers them and feels like comparison, and the discomfort that arrives every time you grow. And you see it when you let them know. This is the silent strain of competitive relationships. And while they don't always speak of harm, they often feel like harm because your wins challenge their worth. When someone hasn't fully embraced their own value, they start measuring it externally. Your success then becomes a mirror, and instead of inspiration, it triggers insecurity. Psychologists call this social comparison theory, which explains how people assess their own value by comparing themselves to others, especially in areas that they care deeply about. And in competitive dynamics, this comparison isn't always conscious, but it shows up in subtle ways where they downplay your achievements, change the subject when you shine, highlight their own accomplishments in response, and offer support that feels performative or conditional. And research confirms that envy in relationships lead to passive sabotage, emotional distancing, and relational strain because it's not always apparent or malicious. Sometimes it's as simple as them withdrawing their energy when you begin expanding. So you may start to dim yourself by downplaying your dreams and dimming your light, and not because you want to, but because you're unconsciously protecting their ego. This is called self-silencing, a coping mechanism often rooted in trauma and people-pleasing. This creates an internal tug-of-war between you wanting to belong and the person that you're becoming. And the sad part is, they often admire you, but they can't celebrate you. Because when someone hasn't faced their own feelings of inadequacy, they project them onto you. But it's not your job to dim your light or to keep someone else comfortable in the dark, because real connections don't see your growth as a threat. They see it as a reflection of what's possible. So if someone's presence keeps forcing you to play small, that's not love. That's a limitation. You don't rise by accident. You rise by alignment. And keeping the wrong people around you is destructive to your well-being. Every moment you delay a boundary, every time you silence your instincts, you teach your nervous system to normalize chaos. And over time, that can become your identity. So remember, you don't just outgrow people, you outgrow patterns. And if you keep people around who trigger your nervous system, you train your brain to accept less than you deserve. Peace, it isn't found. It's something you protect. And the cost of not choosing yourself is choosing not to be in peace. And if this video helped you, let me know in the comments if you can now identify someone you need to cut off. And subscribe to Trauma Free for weekly tools to help you upgrade your life. And if you're wanting to go deeper, download my Healing My Trauma notebook, a guided journal designed to help you unpack your emotions, rewrite your inner narrative, and create a safe space for self-love and self-compassion after traumatic experiences. Click the link in the description to get your free copy today. And until next time, take care.